Good morning. Before I take your questions, I want to take a few minutes to highlight some of the items that were just discussed and voted on during the Board of Estimates meeting. First is the performance audit for the Department of Transportation. We welcome the findings of the audit and any opportunity to improve our processes as a government. It's important, however, to put the audit into its proper context. When we look at the quadrennial audits, we need to remember that they are in addition to regular outside audits that are performed of the city of Baltimore. The audits include a comprehensive annual financial report, 911 emergency systems program report, water utility fund statements, wastewater utility fund statements, parking facility fund statements, and an A133 federal grant single audit. The findings of the DOT performance audit do not reveal any instances of fraud. It does not reveal any instance of waste. It does not reveal any instance of abuse, misuse of government funds, or any other intentional misconduct. And the absence of a finding of intentional misconduct is consistent with the department's record of performance, as DOT has also undergone years of outside auditing from federal, state, and city agencies and has never been cited for a major finding. With that being said, we take very seriously the central finding of the audit, that there's a lack of a clear process for keeping documents that support our performance data. To that end, we will create a quadrennial audit committee to generate recommendations for a citywide policy governing the maintenance of documents supporting reported performance data. Let me be clear. The finding is not a surprise to anyone, and we've been proactive in taking measures to address the issues identified in the audit long before the audit existed. Specific to supporting documentation for performance measures, we've been requesting source documentation for data through our budget process since the beginning of fiscal year 2015. Remember, this audit only covers the period of fiscal year 2010 to fiscal year 2013. We've also begun efforts to create a data warehouse which is intended to automate data collection. The data warehouse will remove the manual aspect of retention of supporting documents and will allow us to improve the reliability of that data, while saving time and energy currently required of staff in order to meet the document retention standards cited in the audits. The audit also generally highlights a historical gap in data being collected by our performance management wing and CityStat and our finance team through our outcome budgeting process. The gap between performance management and resource allocation is specifically why I pushed to create the outcome stat model. Outcome stat will connect our goals, strategies, and implementation efforts so that as a government, we understand whether our strategies are being implemented effectively on a day-to-day basis, and it will help us determine whether the strategy itself is effective in moving the city forward towards our long-range goals. The synchronization between CityStat and budgeting is something that has never existed in the city before. But it is a direction I chose because I felt we needed to give Baltimore a more cutting-edge government that the citizens deserve. This performance audit is just the first from the 13 agencies that are required to undergo quadrennial audits. The audits consist of separate financial and performance audits for each agency, and I know that there's been a lot of discussion about delays in these audits, but I believe it is important to understand that these auditors are independent of city government, and they operate on their own time schedule. While we can gently encourage the auditors to move quickly, the goal is to obtain accurate and independent evaluations. So the last thing we want to do is to tell them, to give them a deadline and on when to submit work and push them towards submitting something that could potentially be inaccurate. We anticipate that more audits will be coming in the weeks and months to come, and we want the auditors to get it right. When I'm finished, we'll have with us when I'm finished, we have with us my finance director, city stat director, and transportation director who are available to answer questions that you may have. But before taking questions on the audit, I also want to talk briefly about an important new mid-year spending that the Board of Estimates approved today. Our critical spending includes nearly $350,000 to hire additional crime scene analysts to bolster the police department's overburdened forensics lab. Our crime lab will receive a projected 15,000 requests this year to investigate homicides, burglaries, and other crimes. In many conversations in neighborhoods throughout the city, I've been hearing concerns about delays in the crime lab response time. For people who have been victimized by crimes, lengthy delays to wait around for crime lab results are unacceptable. The additional dollars will be used to purchase new equipment, add 8 technicians to the police department's team of 28, and to bring 2 more lab supervisors on for a total of 5. Our goal is to make these positions a permanent part of our budget moving forward in the next fiscal year to better handle the increase, the number of crime lab requests that we have. I'm also proposing a significant addition to the budget for our Office of Civil Rights and Wage Enforcement. Our director, Keisha Brown, is playing a critical role in our focus on improving police-community relations. The $186,000 would be spent to give our Civilian Review Board a community liaison, a deputy director, and 2 additional investigators. The additional staff will assist in investigating police misconduct complaints, as well as educating the community about their rights, which ultimately will help us to build trust between law enforcement and the community. Keisha is here with us today as well to answer any questions about the additional resources for her office. With today's approval from the Board of Estimates, the spending now goes to the City Council, and we look forward to working with the City Council to win its approval. With that, I think I've talked long enough. I'll open things up to questions on the audits and the new spending, and then we can move on to general questions.
Can we ask you, because you talked about the Civilian Review Board, you said that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the criticism of the Civilian Review Board is it doesn't do anything.
So that's why I was very pleased to bring Keisha Brown on board, who's working to revamp the office and make make recommendations moving forward to enhance the effectiveness of the Civilian Review Board. And Keisha, if you want to talk about that.
So, thank you, Madam Mayor. There are a number of reform efforts that it's going to be a long process, but one that we are dedicated to. If there's anything specific that you...
Well, you don't have any teeth, am I correct?
Well,
there's no teeth in the civilian review process.
No, actually, our model is in line with several others around the country in it that we have investigatory authority. Not all civilian review boards around the country actually even have that. We also have the authority to review police policies as well. As you probably know, our jurisdiction is not only with the Baltimore City Police Department, but also the Sheriff's Office, the Baltimore City School Police, and most recently the Watershed Police, Baltimore City Community College, and Morgan State University. That was executed in this past legislative session, those last law enforcement units. And so the role of the Civilian Review Board is to provide the community an opportunity to weigh in on police misconduct allegations. And so it allows members of the community to have access to an independent, neutral body to make a review. We have our own investigators, we'll have our own staff, and be able to present those things to the police commissioner. So I think in the past, there have not been certain structures in place. I've spoken with the police commissioner. We look forward to working together in order to ensure that there is a very clear process. By law, the police commissioner is not to make disciplinary actions on cases that are before the Civilian Review Board until the Civilian Review Board has issued a finding. And so part of this is making sure that that process is held, that we take each step properly and ensure that the people have an opportunity to be heard, and that disciplinary actions that need to be executed are done so.
But it's not binding, am I correct?
As far as if we say sustain a complaint, the police commissioner has to sustain it. No, like any agency head, that police commissioner has the ultimate say as far as what are the next steps that he will take. But it is something that he is required to take under consideration, just like he's required to take under consideration his own internal affairs report.
Can I ask ask about the community coordinator? Did you hire that person already, and how soon do you hope to get that process underway?
Right. So the way it works, my understanding is that once the Board of Estimates votes, which they did today, to approve that contract, that person is able to start. So they are looking to start tomorrow, actually. And what was the other part of your question?
How soon do you hope to have that mediation track available?
Early next year. So we're hoping for January. I was very excited to be able to get that agenda item approved so that that person can start to do the groundwork of making sure that we have the advertising in place, preparing pamphlets, flyers, updating our website to include the mediation program. We've already been in conversations and discussions with the police department, mediators, as well as the FOP in order to make sure that this mediation program, when it does launch, has the full support of all parties involved.
And so I think I saw on the board agenda, because I went back and looked, that you all had selected the person in maybe November, but she wouldn't be starting until tomorrow. Is that the same person, like Gillespie maybe?
No,
Okay.
it's not.
Well, maybe I can follow up and
Okay.
thank you.
On the question of audits, if we're good on that, there was something mentioned about that DOT has had clean bills from state and federal audits on projects that got funding. Is that because there's a different level of requirements at those state and federal audits than this audit, or because the accounting system was actually different that was used for those projects?
Both. The federal guidelines and state guidelines for document retention and documentation associated with projects that are executed and in support of funding that we receive from these agencies is very clear. The audit process for the performance audits, I believe this is the first performance audit that has been done here in the city, in Baltimore City. And many of the items or much of the documentation that was requested was not required to be collected or retained for the years that they looked at. So they were looking at fiscal year 2010, which the performance measures, et cetera, were developed in calendar year 2008 because there's a 2-year delay between the two. So at that point in time, there was no requirement for a lot of the documentation that they requested, and the auditors have the freedom and flexibility, as I understand it, to determine what they want to see.
What kind of missing documentation are we talking about? I mean, is this receipts? Is it
It's the source documentation. For example, we have bridge reports, and from those bridge reports, the engineers will do calculations to determine the condition of a bridge. Well, they may not retain all of the calculations. They retain the bridge reports. So if someone said for 2008, how did you determine this? They'd have to go back and walk through the calculation again because they didn't necessarily have to retain the calculation that went into the summary to produce the list of bridge reports.
All right, any other questions on these two topics? All right, thank you all. Anything else?
Yes, please. On Thursday, your grocery store tax credit should get final approval. Why do you think it's necessary to offer this sort of tax credit instead of letting the market determine where the stores come in?
I think the market has been clear, and it has left many of our neighborhoods behind. Mm-hmm. And I'm very determined not to be, just to let the market do what it does, but to look for ways to use all of the tools that we have in our toolbox to create the environment that we want. We've used tax credits in the past, and we've seen amazing results. If you just take a look at the downtown business district, the area that has covered by the downtown partnership. When I became mayor, they were in a panic because Harbor East was going up, and they saw their tenants the tenants with means choosing to move to Harbor East. And there was this notion that the central business district was going to be left behind. Had I left things up to the market, that's what would have happened, but I didn't do that. We did a thorough evaluation of the market, of the strengths of that central business district and the weaknesses, and put together an apartment tax credit that has transformed in very short order the central business district, creating the fastest growing residential community in the city. I know that by using the tools that we have that are available to us, we can continue to do the same thing when it comes to food deserts in our community. I'm going to continue to look for ways that we can spur investment in the neighborhoods that need it the most, and I anticipate this tax credit being helpful in bridging that gap and investing in some of our struggling communities a more feasible, more profitable experience for these investors that we're trying to get to bring these necessary resources into our community.
On the $2 million for the pattern of practice review for the outside law firm, there's probably some questions out there about whether that could have been done with a different firm for a lower rate.
And that makes a whole lot of sense to face one of the biggest challenges that we have in this city on the cheap. I mean, that makes a lot of sense.
Was the city not staffed to handle the work on its own?
There's no city that's staffed to handle a Department of Justice patterns and practice by itself, nor do I think any city should. For every single person that has been asking for a patterns and practice investigation, when you make those requests, you should understand that they come with a cost. I clearly understood that. And we've taken precautions to make sure that we are prepared as a city. If you take a look, and there have been recent articles in either the Post or the New York Times about the history of pattern and practice investigation, what you have seen is they've cost cities upwards of $100 million. And we want to make sure that we get this right for the city of Baltimore. And that doesn't mean doing it on the cheap. It doesn't mean handling it on the fly. It means getting the expertise we need to make sure that we're able to comply with the investigation, that we're able to do everything that we can to put ourselves in the best position to get reform and to make sure it sticks.
Mayor, through November, the police department's overtime bill was more than $18 million. That's on track for probably a $50 million bill by the end of the fiscal year. Now there's another million here, million there going to the police department for its variety of things. This is obviously going to be a $500 million plus enterprise in the city of Baltimore by the end of the FY16 year. Is there a point where it's fair for the taxpayer to ask, is it just a blank check?
I think that's a fair question. I also think, while that's been a consistent question of yours, the question I get from constituents is about safety. And are we doing single thing that we can to put more officers on the street? Thank you.
James.
Thank you.